Hello and welcome back to Kinboshi Radio, where Nick Abasho is over, but that's not even half of the news, because to start off, big changes in the Yokozuna world, as we have lost a Yokozuna and gained a Yokozuna. But first, how you feeling?
It's such a bummer to see Terunofuji leave, but I'm so glad that we can finally let this man heal.
I mean, let's start with Teru. I like that because he came back. I mean, officially it's 2 and 3 and then retired, right? Like, the man clearly wasn't healthy and hasn't been healthy since 2022. Well, probably before that. 2021 is really the big year of his career, and the last time. How do you feel? I kind of wanted him to find a way to ride off into the sunset, but I'm not actually that sad right now, as sad as I thought I would be. And I almost think it's like you're saying, this idea of letting him heal, just like this one last time, this January, one last go, and it just wasn't there.
No, and I think I'm glad he's clearly to the point where it's he probably wasn't going to come back and win another 14-1 U show and to just keep pushing himself through it. I don't think would have been a really good service to the ridiculously incredible legacy that he had. And it's good that I still think he can ride off on a high note.
Yeah. I hear you. And yeah, I mean, he hadn't done a 14 and 1 for a couple years. So, I mean, I know by months it was less than that, but a couple calendar years. And so I think this is what you're saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, but how can we be sad about that career after he came back and got the 10? I was at a point where I didn't even think he was going to get the 10. So I'm extremely satisfied. This guy is the best comeback story in sumo. All respect to Ura, but he just did this. Teru did the same thing better. So I would just much rather celebrate what Teru was than focus on what we missed out on in those years of injury or how it ended, I guess is how I feel.
Oh, 100%. Like you said, he's the greatest comeback story. He did all these things, came back, got Yokozuna. Not only that, but he's injured and he comes back, gets his 10 still, even from that.
Right. Even from these additional injuries, like missing so many Basho and carrying the torch well at Yokozuna. And we talked beforehand that we thought maybe the idea here is that Teru's coming back to try to do what happened with Hakuoho and him, where even if someone loses to Teru, they can still get promoted, or that they just go through Teru to get it. Ultimately, we were denied that, but we did get a new Yokozuna. Not necessarily who I thought. I mean, Kotozakura had the front runner's seat, and it was not good. We won't get into that right now. We'll talk maybe at the end about that, but we want to stick to the positives. But Hoshoryu, the other contender, now both of them had been named potential Yokozuna candidates after November. And the reason for that, obviously, is that technically a Junyu show that is considered equivalent performance is often used to sort of fudge the numbers on things like this. And so I really thought, and we'll get into what I think now, but at the beginning, I thought what that meant was that if we saw an exact reverse, like if Hoshoryu goes 14 and 1 and beats Kotozakura on the final day, then he gets to have Yokozuna as well. But what we ended up getting was 12 and 3 from Hoshoryu, but an insane final day where he wins 3 times on the last day, going through 2 young Rikishi who were having extremely good performances, both of whom we're going to talk about later in Oho and Kinbozan. But so he got his 14 wins, right? Not the way we thought. And now he's Yokozuna. He's wearing the belt. How do you feel about it, Nick?
Oh God, I don't want this to come off negative. I'm kind of mixed emotions about it. And some of it's probably I'm just overthinking it, but a loss to Terunofuji, a bunch of losses to Terunofuji, weirdly. Hirodeumi, Shodai, I'm yeah, of course, he was an Ozeki, no big deal. It's I was after those, I was okay, he's done. No way. He lost too many. And now then when it flipped on the last day, I think that just I had to flip my brain around that. Maybe because I was already going into it being nope, he already lost his chance.
Mm-hmm. I had similar thoughts. And the crazy thing though is so I'm gonna give us some narrative historically in a second. But just the first 4 days of this tournament, his wins over Kirishima, who started weak but ended strong, whatever, and Wakatakakage, guys who I thought were major contenders, in those first 4 days, I'm yeah, this is one of the best wrestlers there is today. his skill, his physicality, the depth of tools he has, I think anyone who refuses to give him that credit is doing themselves a disservice, right? He's very obviously one of the best, but even just within the Ozekis, like, I'm uncertain if he's better than healthy Onosato and healthy Kotozakura. I mean, like, I guess he is, right? At least right now, but I just think that we're setting up for an era where those three titans should be trading blows and it should be really exciting. But all that to say, on the dohyo, I have no questions about his physical ability and his un undeniable uh qualifications as a yokozuna on the dohyo, right? The question is the math nerding, right? Technically, you're supposed to win back-to-back Yusho to go up to yokozuna. He didn't, but that's not the only time that's happened, so like that's not a problem. But in recent memory, so Terunofuji himself went up after not winning back-to-back at Ozeki because he went 12-3 and won a playoff at Ozeki, and then went 14-1 but lost to Hakuoho on the last day, the very last day of Hakuo's fighting career, but still got promoted. Um, but for one, we can say, yeah, going 14-1 and losing to the current Yokozuna, like that's okay. That's an equivalent performance. But also, Teru had already won the tournament before his other win as well. It's just that he had been Sekiwake. Otherwise, he would have already been promoted to Yokozuna there. So there's some like conversations there about how and why that might have happened. And then like even before that, Kakuryu, right? Kakuryu also made it up after winning a Yushu at Ozeki and runner-up playoff loss at Ozeki. But those were both 14-1s from him, so a little more impressive. And then another historical thing just to talk about, like whatever, but Hakuho himself, he actually was denied the promotion that we're talking about. He had gone 14-1 with a U show in 2006 and then followed it up with a 13-2 runner up. And they ended up denying him. It wasn't until a year later that he actually got his back-to-backs, including the second one being a 15-0 Zensho U show, the first of his career, that he emphatically stamped his way up there. So, uh, okay, all that to say, like, yeah, it can happen, but other people's runner-up performances by the numbers looked more impressive. And then if we're talking about Hoshoryu's 12-3 and 13-2, what about Takakeisho is the big thing for me. If I'm going to play bad cop here, right? Like, why is it that in 2020, Takakeisho went 12-3 and 13-2 with one U show and one Junyo show and was denied? And then Takakeisho again in November 2022 and January 2023 went 12-3 with a double playoff, like that he ended up getting a Jun U show for, not getting it done, and then a 12-3 but winning the U show and was denied. And okay, this has been a lot of context and babbling, so I apologize, Nick. But with that said, why was what Takakeisho did not enough, and what Hoshoryu did was enough? And I have an answer for that myself, but I want to know what you think.
So I think the first thing that jumps out to me is simply the JSA having a Yokozuna at that time.
Sure.
So they were
Sure.
like, oh, like I think they're maybe trying to be super strict with it. And like again, I'm not saying anything negative about Hoshoryu's performance. Like clearly he's exceptional. But I was wondering if maybe because they had that versus now that he dropped out, they're like, oh, maybe this isn't good enough. And it is. I am definitely excited to have a healthy Yokozuna who's going to be there every time.
Yeah. And like we've said, who is great. Neither of us, I think, is saying that Hoshoryu doesn't fight like a Yokozuna. He obviously does. I'm glad you brought that up because I made a post on the channel just after the Basho concluded and it became clear that Hoshoryu was going to become Yokozuna. And just like the first line of the post is just, do you think Sumo needs a Yokozuna? Because I think what's happened here is this is definitely the JSA saying Sumo needs a Yokozuna. If Teru is leaving, we need a Yokozuna. And so here's our best candidate at this time. We're going to elevate him. And throughout the post, what I kind of the point I was trying to make is that frustrates me to say that we need a Yokozuna because I think that opens a crack for people to say Hoshoryu doesn't really deserve it and he just got this because they decided they need him. And I think that's unfair because I think he does deserve it, which I'll get into in a little bit. But what do you think? I mean, there were some really great comments in there. A lot of people were making the point that um, they, bringing up these ideas of like the religious components and like what people like to talk about the ceremony and the history of sumo and things like that. Other people just brought up the raw numbers of like he fought 3 times in one day, beat all the contenders, beat guys who were fighting well. In fact, it's even impressive that he had a comeback victory, right? Like all sorts of different thoughts. But what do you think, Nick? Does sumo need a Yokozuna? Does it?
I,
Is it okay for sumo to bend its own rules to have one?
I don't think they necessarily need one, especially
Mm,
like truthfully, if you look at the quality of like your three Ozeki right now are good.
mm, mm.
It's not like truly, it's not like he would have gone like exceptionally long without it. So I do think like he deserved it in that run. I
Yeah.
think sometimes it's easy to like I said, I think with Takakeisho where maybe you just expected different from him or something, but I think I agree with what you say where it's easy to be like because they kind of signal that yes, we need one. Maybe people use that to kind of speak poorly upon Hoshoryu, but I don't
Mhm.
agree.
Yeah, and here'll be my argument. Now, you hinted at this earlier, but what I think this really breaks down to is how strongly do you feel about, and not the royal you, I guess, just like you meaning everybody listening, right? And so post in the comments even like let me know because I'm still curious. I know we've already got some great comments on the previous post, but how strongly did you feel about his runner-up performance in November? Because if Hoshoryu, and I think even Takakeisho, right, to take my previous devil's advocate argument, if Takakeisho was an Ozeki and won back-to-back tournaments at 11-4 even, right, which everybody, the idea is like, oh, less than 12, this is ridiculous. Or obviously Kisen Osato, as Goose at Sunday Morning Sumo Show is so fond of pointing out, the idea that 12 wins is not a U show. So let's even say Takakeisho had won back-to-backs with 11 wins. Think he's a Yokozuna, no doubt. I think they would never deny an Ozeki with back-to-back. Although, like, historically, I guess, like, Raiden, I guess they did, but that's whatever. First of all, we're talking about 200 years ago. And second, I don't know what was going on then. Um, but 11 wins, back-to-back U shows, I don't think they would ever deny someone for that. So the question to me is, it's like my first problem was that, oh, this 12-3 is not that impressive because of these losses to Maegashira's, exactly like you were talking about. But he did win, so it doesn't matter. The conversation is not about January. The conversation is not and should not be about January because he got the win. Everything is irrelevant. He got the win. The question is, how strong was his November? And the Yokozuna Deliberation Council, the JSA, and me myself on this show and others, I thought that his performance in November was enough that he deserved to be considered right now, that runner-up. And the reason for that boils down to exactly what you were saying. He had losses to Abi at the time of Sekiwake and to Kotozakura, obviously a Yokozuna who then ended up winning the thing. I think if Terunofuji, for example, had a tournament where he had a couple losses to a Sekiwake and an Ozeki, I don't think I'm really batting an eye. Those are guys who are good enough they're supposed to be challenging someone. And then if you go back and watch them, I he slipped in both those losses. Both of the slips were forced by his opponents. So not trying to take anything away from either Abi or Kotozakura, because in the second slip, the loss to Kotozakura, the slip was forced by Kotozakura's overpowering top-down strength, kind of those ways Hakuoho used to win. And in the Abi match, it's classic Abi. It's he goes in for the throat, right? And Hosh puts his left foot back extremely far, like stabilizing for that and preparing to push back. And then Abi pulls away. There's nothing there. Hosh's foot slips out from under him. Whatever. Um, so this is my argument in defense of Hoshoryu as a Yokozuna is that I already thought that tournament was enough. Those losses were such razor thin margins that I would not be shocked at all if like we could build a time machine and run that tournament 100 times, and if in like 50 of those times Hoshoryu actually went 15-0 and won the whole thing by not having those slips. So I don't know. That's my thing. I've been thinking a lot about this because it's that thing I was saying. I think there's about to be an unfair narrative for Hoshoryu that he doesn't really deserve it and that he's only getting Yokozuna because Teru left. And I don't think that's fair. I think he was so good in November. And at the end of the day, he got the win in January, think he deserves it. Too much
You know what though?
babbling.
Honestly, after listening to that argument though,
Yeah.
and really like thinking about and following along, I'm like, I actually agree. I think you've really flipped my mind on that.
I
I think
appreciate
that
it.
was like the last piece like I needed to
Yeah.
hear like was really like you said looking at
Yeah.
November and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because right, like it's that's where I had to flip my head too, and why I'm so thankful that everybody commented on that post, that I was able to read through those things, because that was kind of the like mental gymnastics I was trying to play with myself. And finally I had like it's an epiphany that I'm like, oh, January doesn't matter. We're not talking about January. He got the win. So no matter what happens, that was always going to count towards his record. And if November was good enough at the end of November, which they said it was, and I said it was, and so a lot of other people we know said it was, then what are we talking about here?
No, I agree actually. I think that 100% makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm stoked. And then the other thing is, at the end of the day, I no one can question his sumo. He's so good. And even in this era where we have so many young guns flying up and they're super exciting and very talented, I'm not trying to deny how great Onosato is. I'm not trying to deny how impressive Takerufuji is, but just like watch Hoshoryu's sumo, man. That guy fights like a Yokozuna, and we are in store for a brilliant era, even if he ends up being more like one of the examples I brought up before, right? Like Kakuryu gets to Yokozuna, and then it's more than a year. It's a year and a half before he ever wins his first Yusho at Yokozuna. Part of that's because he's going up against Hakuoho in a lot of those fights, and so it's really impressive that he ends up getting 5 Yusho in the Hakuoho era as a fellow Yokozuna. But just like, Hoshoryu is going to be great, even with these amazing contenders around him and the up-and-comers as well, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And as long as we don't see some crazy, ridiculous out of nowhere injury,
Mm, mm,
I think he will continue to do that as well. Like he's just going to keep pushing everybody.
I
And
think
he's
so
not
too.
going to be somebody where like some random up and cutter is going to come up and blow everybody out. Like I think he would be a stop to that.
I agree, and I think that's what the JSA is looking at as well, is always wanting even a Yokozuna for youngsters to test their mettle against. And oh boy, is Hoshoryu a test when you're coming up. But let's talk about that, because you've made a great pivot point. So before the last Basho, if you didn't see it, we did a little like prediction, just having fun for 2025, right? And so we were like, hey, Onosato's run was the story of 2024 for both of us. So who is the next Zoomer who can kind of do what Onosato did? Who can maybe make a run for Ozeki this year of these young upcoming generation? And we talked about a lot of them, not all of them, but whatever. But some big ones we talked about that I want to highlight here are uh, you blew my mind and I loved it. And so I just love when we can hear different ideas about sumo. But you said that Kinbozan, after how he impressed you after his one tournament drop to Juryo, and then like impressive, like kind of gritting his teeth and fighting his way back to Makuuchi after one tournament, winning that Yusho. You were like, I think Kinbozan can make a run at Ozeki this year. And then my little peasant brain exploded. I had no idea that that was going to come out of your mouth. And then, not only that, you were right. You were right, man. But talk to me about Kinbozan. And then the other one we're going to talk about is Oho, because we both kind of like downplayed Oho and said we didn't think he had a chance. But then you said, and then you won me over, that Kinbozan had a chance, and now both those guys were in contention for this Yusho. Give me your thoughts here. Break it down, because you're clearly the soothsayer.
So truthfully, I was like half kidding, I guess, when I said Kimbo's on. I
Yeah.
had no like I thought he would do well. I didn't know that he would be like an
Leading the
inch
tournament.
from literally winning the whole thing.
From day 1 to day 15, he was the leader. It's tragic that he lost it at the end. He gave us a great ride because he was the leader the whole time, but just like, it still boggles the mind that he was even contending.
Yeah, when he hit like well, yeah, like day 10, 11, I was like, "Oh my god." I'm like, "He's going to win this whole thing." Like I could not believe it. And then of course, who comes up? Abi
It's the dream killer.
of the Dream Killer.
I can't believe it.
And
Avi
then
ends
but
it.
then
Yeah.
so he loses to Abi and you're like, "Okay, that makes." And then beats him to Sato the next day. You're like, "Oh my god, what is this?"
And Onosato, who now we're not talking about him a ton here, not trying to down, but like just what he still got 10 wins, right? A down tournament for Onosato, but double digit wins. I mean, still, it was not like he was fighting an injured Onosato. He was fighting the real deal Onosato.
Yeah, and that guy just doesn't lose that much.
No, not since we've seen him here. Again, his bad tournaments are 9-6, which yes, we don't want to see that from an Ozeki, but 9-6 is a great tournament.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, like I said, like it was partial kidding, but like I really do think that those losses and those demotions, like I think that really went to his heart.
And I think because his coach had been saying stuff about that the whole time and talking about needing to get some sort of switch to snap in his head because he's like, basically it's an argument we've heard in other sports all the time, right? Like Kinbozan is a guy who has all the physicals that you look at him and you're like, yeah, that guy's going to be a great sumo wrestler. He's got the weight, he's got the frame, he's got the height, he's got the strength, blah blah blah. He's got it all. So his coach was saying he's relied on his physicals his entire career, and now he got to Makuuchi and got slapped down. So the idea being, hopefully that woke him up, and it looks like it did. In his losses, it's that his footwork was suspect, but anytime he kept his feet under him, the guy looked like a dominant force. And so if he can continue to work on his footwork and balance, is he gonna make an Ozeki run this year, Nick?
God, I want him to. It's funny that you say, like, as soon as you said his footwork, the first thing popped in my head is like, oh man, July's gonna kill him.
Oh,
Because that's, just the natural, that being the toughest one to stay on your feet.
yeah, yeah.
But I think
However, new arena, not 10,000 degrees in the old arena
that's
anymore.
true.
Yeah, yeah.
That could help.
Anyway, yeah.
But honestly, like, I'm gonna go fully optimistic and say yes.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I think if he does, it's so okay. He's got a tough road to hoe because to get to Ozeki, your 33 wins actually are technically supposed to be at Sanyaku, so at Komusubi and Sekiwaki. They will make an exception sometimes for one tournament's worth in the Joy, right? The Joijin, which is either, depending on who you're asking, there's the top Joijin is the M1 to 3 or whatever, but technically I believe it goes down to 5 that they kind of consider those top rankers because those are the guys who have to fight the Sanyaku anyway. So like this performance should jump him up to M5, I think, which puts him in the Joy, right? But it's just that thing where like technically he has a Junyo show and it's a runner-up, so like I think that will factor in, but none of these wins technically count yet,
Yes.
depending on how
So
strict they
essentially,
want to be.
he will literally have to follow the exact path
Yeah.
of Onosato. Minus, I think he had it looks like he had just a crazy like 9-6.
Mhm.
But for the most part, he's going to follow like that exact path every time.
Yes, he does. But to be Ozeki, technically you just need to average 11 wins over 3 tournaments, and he's already proven that he can do better than that. I know there were some soft matches in there, but still, like, I think the guy's the real deal. Like I said, there are still some raw things in there, but if he's truly motivated and if his coach can get in his head, this man could be an absolute kaiju coming through.
100%. And like, yeah, have I been wrong like 20 times before? Yes,
Yeah.
but this time I
Yeah.
feel it.
And how about another one? So this is one that I was really excited about, talking about these guys, the potential up-and-comers. So Oho. Oho early on is leading the tournament along with Kinbozan and others. It ultimately kind of like fell apart for Oho. And I thought, man, this stinks. Well, he's still going to go ahead and do well enough. He's going to get his Komusubi debut because his 2 losses, he lost to Hoshoryu and Kotozakura. Now, it was a wounded Kotozakura, right? We don't know what was going on there. But like those were fair losses. And then he reels off 3 straight wins after that before losing to Kirishima. Also not a shameful loss. Long story short, Oho battled his way back and forced his way into the playoff because he's the guy who beat Kinbozan on the final day to make the playoff even happen. Hoshoryu has no chance at a Yusho or at Yokozuna if it weren't for how good Oho was by knocking off Kinbozan. So now, you and I, the 3 we kind of poo-pooed were Oho, Gonoyama, and Atamifuji, who were the Joijin, who are these guys who we keep seeing do well in the Joijin, but not breaking through. Well, Oho is now broken through in astounding fashion, while obviously very tough tournament for Atamifuji, kind of run-of-the-mill for Gonoyama, what we expected from him at M3. But Oho, is your mind changed on Oho? Does this man have a chance at making the Ozeki run this year?
I want it to be changed so badly.
Mm.
Like, I feel like I'm like, okay, no, he's doing terrible. And he gets these good tournaments. And I'm like, he could do it. We're here. But you know what, though? The last time he had a 10-5, he was at Mega Sure 11s, which is wildly different from doing 12-3 at Mega Sure 3.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I really want this to be like the turning point for him.
I'll say it. I think it is. I think I was wrong. Now I was high on Oho in that I thought he was going to get into Sanyaku here in this first half of the year. Um, but our previous point, like, I'm curious. I don't know if they will, but I wonder if these 12 wins, if on an Ozeki run, they will let him count these towards his run, right? Like if he fights and gets double-digit wins at Komusubi in the next Basho, and then gets double-digit wins at Sekiwake. Let's just say he gets 10 and no 10 and 10. Well, there's no way they'll give it to him at 10 and 10. He's got to get 11 in one of those. Um, but I think because of who he beat. At the end of the day, he did beat Abi, Wakatakakage, Wakamotoharu, Daieisho in his first 4 days. He beat 4 Sanyaku, and then followed it up by beating an Ozeki, Onosato. So even though he lost to the other two Ozeki, like, I think that there's enough here to say that this performance in the Joy for him was Sanyaku equivalent because he fought all the Sanyaku. Um, so
I would agree with that. If
yeah.
he can do like another like at 11, 12 for the next two,
Mhm.
I think it'd be a real case for it
I think so too. I think
if he can keep it up.
if he can keep it up, right? But at this point, I actually put Oho ahead of Kinbozan, but I'm glad you stuck to your guns on Kinbozan for sure, because I also think it's like Kinbozan's the long con, right? Like, if he's making Ozeki, it's like we're biting our nails in November of 2025, hoping that he can just get it across the finish line, right? Whereas Oho, I'm like, if if he if he is this guy, if he is the guy we saw through the first 5 days, which I think he is, we could be talking about like July, him doing that, you know? So I don't know, man. I'm really impressed with the guy. How about the guy that we both said? So, spoiler here. The three guys that we ended up picking that we thought could contend for Ozeki this year of the Zoomers, right? We said Kinbozan with your wildness that proved to be prescient. We said Hira de Umi, who struggled at 7 and 8, but like, I don't know, man. I still believe in that guy. The reason we were high on Hiradomi is because we'd already seen him go to the Sanyaku and we'd seen him do it. We'd seen him beat these guys. So no, by no means do I think he's out of the picture yet. He's just not in it right now after that 7 and 8. But the other one, the one that we both thought was the front runner for it, was no surprise, Takerufuji. And Takerufuji, again, I'm gonna say this all tongue in cheek, right? He disappointed this Basho with a 10-5, which is insane, right? But it's not that he was disappointing, it's that he lost to guys who are good, but the Tamawashi loss on day 4. Can't be doing that, man. And then his other losses aren't bad, though. Kinbozan, who was obviously on a tear. Daieisho, the Sekiwake, who is awesome and had 11 wins in this Basho. Hoshoryu, who won the thing. And Kirishima on the final day, who proved to be extremely, like, bounce-back contender. We'll talk about Kirishima later. So, like, the losses were good. It's just kind of similar to what we've talked about with other guys in the past. Like, in the 50-50s, if we're talking about you becoming an Ozeki, you gotta win more than your fair share of the 50-50s. In this case, he lost a lot of the 50-50s. That's gotta turn around. He can't be doing that anymore. He can't be in a position where the only Sanyaku he's beating is Abi and a struggling Kotozakura.
No, that 100% makes sense. Like,
Again,
sorry, hold on, I'm losing my train of thought.
you're good. I feel, well, I'm probably the one making you lose your train of thought because I'm interrupting, but like, the guy's great. 10 wins is awesome. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying he's not good. I'm just saying the conversation at Ozeki, fairly or unfairly, like, he's got to do better. Literally, he needs to average 11 wins over 3 tournaments. So even though 10 wins is not a disappointing tournament, it is under the pace for Ozeki.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Now I remember what I was going to say. So with 10-5, it's
Mhm.
like you said, the losses, it's most likely an experience thing, but to a point, you're not going to get, and now obviously that this is necessarily a goal for everybody, but it's like, I don't think you're going to get Ozeki this year if experience is what's holding you back against these,
Mm-hmm.
because then you're still just going to keep losing to them.
Yeah. Yep. And
you have, like you said, you have to be able to beat these guys if you want to hit up that level.
yes. And my thing about Takerufuji, the reason why I call this tournament disappointing is actually intended as like a compliment to him, because I think he's better than that. I'm like, you could have beat Daieisho. And I love Daieisho. I am one of the biggest Daieisho, so I freaking love that guy. But I'm like, Takerufuji, not only do you need to beat Daieisho, I know you're better than this. I know you can beat Daieisho, so show me next Basho. You know, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Mm.
Now, talking of 10 and 5s, though, another 10 and 5. So, okay, I'm very excited. Hakuoho. We like kind of pulled him out of the normal conversation of our Zoomer contenders, right? I think we did 10 or something, and then he was the 11th, like, wild card guy. Reason being, I think, felt we don't know if Hakuoho is the Hakuoho we knew, or rather, I'll say it this way, right? Like, I'm like, the Hakuoho of 2025, I was like, is he Ochiai? The guy we saw streaming up, the guy who was better than Onosato, was Onosato before Onosato and was better on the rise up. And I just wasn't sure after these struggles with his upper body that he still was. However, this Basho, his legs, he's been doing some work on them. His legs now rival Terunofuji as the sexiest legs in the division, and he's still got 10 wins. So I straight up said in our last show, I was like, if he reels off 3 8 and 7s, I'm stoked, because that means he's back, he's hanging in the top division, he's grinding his way up. He far surpassed that. So, like, the story of 2 10-win Bashos, right? Takerufuji is a disappointing 10-win tournament, and Hakuoho is a shockingly impressive 10 and 5. But for me, I don't know that means he's going to make an Ozeki run this year. Not that means he's never going to make it, right? But as opposed to Takerufuji's losses against good guys, against Sanyaku, Hakuoho, a loss to Shonan Naomi. Why? A loss to Kagayaki? Why? You know?
Yes. Well, I do think part of it too is, obviously they both came up, had fantastic tournaments, both got injured, but there was a massive difference too in the injury where Takerufuji, where you're not really worried about him that coming back to bite him, versus like Hakuoho, the injury was so severe that I feel like he's still trying to overcome like essentially the handicap that it's given him.
Yeah.
And like nobody wants him to push so hard and so like fight through these to the point where it's like, oh, he got Ozeki and then had to quit because his shoulder's gone.
Right. And we saw a glimpse of it in a couple matches this Basho, but what impressed me so much about Hakuoho on the previous run, from Ochiai to initially making the run and getting that runner-up in his first ever tournament, or contending until the end at any rate. And this is, I think, I'm trying to build off of what you say, because I agree with you. Like, what was impressive to me is he was always so quick off the Tachiai, like in Asanoyama. He was as fast as Asanoyama. That's, I think, one of the biggest things is Asanoyama puts so much force in the Tachiai because he's just in your face before you know it. And that still is the case for Hakuoho, even more so because he's added to his leg strength. But whenever Hakuoho got in trouble before, he would just grip down on your shoulders and overpower you and topple you from the top. And I hadn't seen anyone doing that as consistently as him. And so if we're talking about hurt shoulders, that is not, I don't know if that's coming back. But if he rebuilds himself, he still has so many gifts and so many talents. I still think he can be great. I would love to see that come back, and maybe it's just a longer term recovery from that surgery. But yeah.
No, I 100% agree. Like, no, like I think that's the perfect thing. Like, he also is coming back from having to completely rebuild your sumo, which is not ideally what you want to do when you hit Makuuchi.
And not when you're so young, too. It's great. I mean, he has time to do it, right? But dude's still so young. He's the youngest of any of these contenders. My man is basically almost Gen Alpha, like, let alone we're talking about Zoomers here. But no, like, he is so young. And speaking of that, so like, that's setting the tone, right? We're going to see from him what he can build through this year going forward. And 10 wins is more than I expected, and it's awesome to see. But how about some other guys? What do you think this Basho, just to put a bow on it, how did this set the tone for what we're going to see in 2025 for you? What are the stories that stood out to you that you think are going to carry on? Who did well that you think is going to keep doing well? Who had a bad tournament that you think is a story of more to come? What kind of was this theme, or a handful of themes that you saw coming out of this, Nick?
Well, it sets kind of the positive note, like seeing Kirishima start to come back, where I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm like, maybe like I believe he could get back to Ozeki this year. Like, we've seen it. He's so good.
This is the story. I'm so glad you zeroed in on this, because this is the story to me. I only 11 wins only, but like, I'm like, finally, but okay. So was November a blip, and was September the reality? What was going? Because I love this guy, but like, what is happening?
Yes. I'm 100% in the same boat where I'm like, I want him to get back up. The weird negative one
Mm,
is both the Waka brothers dropping, which I think people have such high expectations. I think, especially in the West, they have
mm.
massive fans.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, well, and I kind of had tempered views on Wakatakakage based on kind of what we saw before. And this is kind
Hmm.
of fitting and right what I expected.
Yeah, yeah. Keep going. Sorry, I can't interrupt.
But I'm still shocked with the like a 6'9" Wakamotoharu. And I'm gonna be like, I just gonna be like, nah, that's a weird one. That's a blip. He'll be back.
Yeah, yeah. He's getting up there though. I worry. Both of them are in their 30s now, right? Like, eh. I agree though on both fronts with you. Like Wakatakakage, and this is not saying I was more. I was impressed with how consistent he was reeling off the double-digit wins and how good he looked off the ACL. I do not consider this losing record to be like devastating by any means. I think he's going to bounce back. But this is interesting because this is a question of, like you're saying, does this set the tone for the year for him of, is this the Wakatakakage of old, where he is awesome up here in the Joy and Sanyaku, but he's bouncing between 7-win and 9-win tournaments, with the caveat that there was a whole stretch where that's what Hoshoryu was doing, and now the man's a Yokozuna. Wakamotoharu, on the other hand, I also am a little worried, just like you, but for me, it's because of his age. But as of right now, I'm not willing to call this a trend for him. I think that we've seen him drop down to Joy and bounce back impressively. I'm with you, but I do hope that the Kirishima one is a trend because uh, that guy is so good. And while he's on the opposite side of his sumo prime, barely, right? Like generally, I want to do a video coming up, but I've done some breakdown. Like, it looks like your sumo prime, if we're looking at guys who are top contenders, is between the age of 26 and 28. So it's actually a lot younger than I expected, but maybe that's because of the weight on your body. So, he's on the other side of that, but like, he showed that he's good. He was in there with the contenders till the end. I love all three of those stories, but I'm babbling. Was there anything more you wanted to say? I cut you off.
No, I think that covered it. Like you said, I don't necessarily believe that this is like a big drop off for Wakatakakage.
Yeah.
It's probably just ideally he finally breaks back into those ranks and then suddenly doesn't do as well. It's just probably not how he wanted to start the year.
Right. I hear you. The other two that I want to bring up that were stories for me, the first one is perhaps the more meaty of the two, but Onosato with his 10 wins, and he looked good. But we're talking all the time about how good the Sanyaku is these days, that those roughly 2022-ish, 2023-ish, where like things were a little shaky. Guys were up and down a lot. It was just like there was a lot of chaos. Not that there weren't good guys, but they weren't consistently good. So Onosato with 10 wins, the man's the truth. We know that. But I'm curious, can he take this and push on to say that instead of 9-win tournaments being his down days, down performance, can we start to say that 10 is down for him and 12 becomes a constant and he starts pushing for 14s and starts pushing for Zensho Yushos to make that Yokozuna career? That's the big storyline I'm looking for, is Onosato pushing on for the rest of this year. But the other one, I hinted at it earlier, Daieisho, 11 wins. The man looks good again. This is a guy, he is so underrated, I think, in the sumo world. You guys gotta go back and check out Daieisho's career record and follow the guy, because he reels off double-digit wins like nobody's business. He almost never make koshis. He's a guy who barely fell short twice on Ozeki bids before. I'm curious because I'm sitting here talking about how worried I am for Wakamotoharu, and he's kind of getting up there in age. Well, Daisho's also on the opposite side of 30, but can he at the very end here make a push to get an Ozeki run? I'm super curious to see if we're going to see that. I don't know how you feel about that. I know we both love pusher thrusters. You're more of an Abi kind of guy. Maybe I'm a Daisho guy. I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
Oh, I love Daieisho.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm just gonna call it. I'm like, yeah, he'll be Ozeki by the end of the year. It's wildly optimistic. It makes no sense, but I'm doing it.
I mean, he's already this. I mean, listen, this tournament should be the start of the run, right? Like, technically, like he's got 19 over 2. What is that? If he goes 14-1 and wins the U show in March, then he'll get it. But hey, March is nicknamed the Stormy Basho, so anything can happen, right? I don't think that'll happen, but I'm curious. He's got his 11 here. Can he do it twice more? If he does, I think because he already has a Yusho, because he's had such a great run in this last 5 years, I do think they would give it to him. That he, they're not going to say he needs another Yusho or whatever. They're going to let the previous one count. So I'm excited
Like
to
you
see
said,
it.
to speak on his record. Sorry, I was
Yeah.
just looking at it. I didn't realize that he got into Makuuchi
Yeah.
in 2015. And he's been fighting there. It looks like he dropped down to Juryo like 3 times total, but otherwise he's been in Makuuchi, bouncing all the way up, mostly in the top ranks for like 6 years, 7 years consistently.
And if I remember correctly, in 2023, I believe he had more wins than any other Rikishi. That's the year where he twice missed out on getting promoted to Ozeki.
Yes.
And so
Very
like
sad year.
yeah, but like it's crazy because it was a great year, right? He that entire year, the lowest rank he fought at was Maegashira 1. So it's not like he was getting padded wins in 2023, and he still led the entire division in wins for the whole year. Just bananas. The guy is great. Don't sleep on Daieisho. I hope that this 11-win tournament is a harbinger of things to come this year. Just like I hope that the Juryo Basho from this year is a harbinger of things to come, because this is where we'll wrap it up. But our beloved Aonishiki is going to make his debut in Makuuchi, but his fellow Ukrainian Shishi, similar to how you were talking about Kinbozan, dropped down an impressive return. Shishi goes 13-2 and wins the thing, with his losses being to like Ryuden, another big guy, like, KG veteran, whatever, and like shockingly Nabatame, who had a great tournament. More on him later. But right now, the big story for me is that 2 Ukrainians will be coming up in the next tournament in March. It's going to be super exciting.
Oh yeah, I couldn't believe that she did that well. I was blown away.
I love it. I hope that means it was some sort of wake-up call for him, and that maybe we're going to see a different Shishi his second time up here, because he very much was a deer in the headlights in November. And I hope now with that experience that he can really do something with his return, and that both these guys kind of fly the flag now that we have officially lost Aoyama as well, right? Like that last generation of Eastern European Rikishi is gone, but here's the new one, these 2 Ukrainians. Super excited to see it. Loved the Basho. Very excited for the Hoshoryu era. Very excited to see these storylines of the young up-and-comers or these KG veterans, Kirishima and Daieisho. Who's going to make these runs going on in the rest of the year? But, I mean, here's wait until March, right? Can't wait for it. But thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.